This is MetroFocus with Raphael P. Roman, Jack Ford, and Jenna Flanagan. MetroFocus is made possible by Sue and Edgar Wackenheim III, Sylvia A. and Simon B. Poita Programming Endowment to Fight Anti-Semitism, the Peter G. Peterson and Joan Gans Cooney Fund, Bernard and Denise Schwartz, Barbara Hope Zuckerberg, the Ambrose Monell Foundation, and by Janet Prindle Seidler, Jody and John Arnhold, Cheryl and Philip Milstein family, Judy and Josh Weston, Dr. Robert C. and Tina Sohn Foundation.
Good evening and welcome to the MetroFocus Front Page Forecast. I'm Raphael P. Roman. This is our weekly look at the news making local and national headlines and its potential impact on the tri-state area. Tonight, as we mark International Women's Day, Governor Andrew Cuomo is facing mounting pressure following more allegations of sexual harassment. We'll discuss the new accusations and why the state Senate's top Democrat, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, is now calling on the governor to resign. We'll talk about what New York City's mayoral candidates are saying about the scandals and ask if this is the time for New York's first female mayor or governor, for that matter. And we'll also look at how the COVID relief bill that just passed the Senate will likely impact New Yorkers. And joining us now to discuss these and other stories are Nayela Amaru, a Democratic strategist, J.C. Polanco, a political commentator, college professor, and former president and commissioner of the NYC Board of Elections, and Alyssa Katz, a deputy editor at the City. Welcome all. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So Alyssa, let me start with you. Before we get to Senate Majority Leader Stewart-Cousins' call for the governor to resign, I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about the two women who accused the governor of sexual harassment over the weekend and the essence of their charges.
Sure. So, these two events took place quite a few years apart. The first of these accusations is coming from Karen Hinton, who's a former spokesperson for Mayor de Blasio, who also worked for Andrew Cuomo when he was Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development under the Clinton administration. And what Hinton is now alleging for the first time is that Cuomo arranged for them to both go to his hotel room, and that there he basically put the moves on her, that he attempted to have physical contact, that she then got out of the room as soon as she could. Cuomo is denying this. Hinton is standing by this, and she's written quite a bit both about about Cuomo and in general, like how these sexual harassment works in government, and for her to make this accusation is quite serious. The other accusation comes from Anna Liss, who was an aide to the governor a few years ago, who had a desk near the governor's office, and she describes how he basically arranged to walk by her desk at different times, had, she said, inappropriately kissed her hand, had asked her questions about whether she had a boyfriend, generally made her feel very uncomfortable. And this followed some of the pattern that we had seen with the allegations from Charlotte Bennett, the accuser, who is describing kind of a series of encounters with the governor in which he had asked her questions about, would she date older men, that he's interested in younger women, asked her about her experience with sexual assault, and so on. So, we're seeing this accumulation of now 5 different reports of Cuomo really crossing boundaries with women, and in at least one instance of Bennett really pretty clearly fitting the description of prohibited sexual harassment as defined in state laws that Cuomo himself really helped beef up as the Me Too movement really gained force.
So Nayela, Majority Leader Stewart-Cousins called for the governor to resign yesterday. First of all, did that surprise you? And secondly, what will that mean for the governor's ability to hold on to power?
So when I read her statement, I wasn't necessarily surprised. I think it's an important statement in terms of where, the Senate Majority Leader stands on, choosing to believe and support women who come forward and share their stories of, pattern of behavior from the governor, as opposed to what is oftentimes the story as to choosing to protect their own power at the expense of women who do choose to share their stories. And I think that she has, with her statement, chosen to show that she is taking a break from the way that politicians have typically handled these types of situations, by calling for the resignation of the governor instead of choosing to cover it up, brush it under the rug, which has been the story of how these types of situations have been typically handled in Albany.
So what's it going to mean for, I mean, that's a big step. That's a big change in the dynamics. What's it going to mean for the governor?
I think for the governor, and particularly in the terms of budget talks, it potentially sets up a new dynamic, if you will, of both of the state leaders, Senate Majority Leader Cousins and Assembly Speaker Heastie, to potentially make a lot of these budget decisions on their own, as Cuomo has lost his power, if you will, in terms of the traditional way that the budget negotiations are typically discussed. He may not necessarily be open to negotiating with the two top state leaders who have called for him to either resign or to consider stepping down, which was the language that Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie used, which could potentially be, have a consequence on the traditional way that our state budget negotiations have typically happened.
JC, in a telephone a press briefing yesterday, the governor said that he was not going to resign because of allegations, because anybody can make an allegation, and that to resign because of an allegation is, in effect, in his words, undemocratic, that everyone should wait for the conclusion of the investigation that the Attorney General is conducting, which, by the way, Senator Gillibrand and Senator Schumer are saying that they're going to wait for that before they make a comment. So far, that's their statement. Does he have a point? And is there anybody in Albany with power who are listening to that point?
I think only he knows. Only he knows what's going on in his soul. It's tough on Happy International Women's Day for everyone that's watching and celebrating today, for women across the state to have to deal with this, and it's making national news. My heart and my prayers and my thoughts are with those that have accused the governor of this wrongdoing. But I'll tell you this, Raphael, I think it's a breath of fresh air to see people within their own party demand accountability from leaders of their own party. That's an incredible thing for us to see. It really changes the dynamic statewide. The governor is not without his sins, and I know Republicans and independents across New York have been calling for curtailing his power, calling for his resignation, for the deaths at nursing homes. But to see now that this has now become a bipartisan issue is something that's incredible. And to see Senator Cousins and Speaker Heastie join the leaders on the other side call for this, it's actually incredible. And I hope it changes the dynamic statewide, that now we start making sure that sexual harassment and the accusations of sexual harassment are no longer partisan. This doesn't recognize political labels. This egregious behavior knows no bounds. And I'm glad to see finally both Democrats and Republicans unifying on this issue. Having said that, I think your viewers would recognize that there has to be some sort of due process, or else this doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right to hear women being harassed this way. And at the same time, we know that there is a system in place, and if there's anyone that can get this done, is the Attorney General. Attorney General Letitia James has proven time and time again not to care about party labels. She'll come after you to seek the truth, and the ball's in her court. Do we now give an opportunity for her to give out this investigation report and at the end make a recommendation? Or do we in fact demand a resignation and an impeachment without an investigation? This is something that your viewers, I think, have to admit doesn't sit well, and we really need to figure out how we're going to go about these issues in the future.
Alyssa, you look through social media. I'm not sure what the latest polls say, but you look through social media when they're talking about the scandal, sexual harassment, the other scandals involving the governor. And it may not be 50-50, but it's close to 50-50, with a lot of people saying, hey, don't do this. Democrats, fellow Democrats, you're just playing into the hands of Republicans. This is a Republican plot. Don't do this. Is anybody, are the Democrats in Albany paying attention? Is this something that they're taking into consideration?
It's interesting. I can't speak to what the Democrats in Albany are doing about this, but surely they're aware of what you're describing. And I think what the reaction you're seeing from just, folks on social media who are Democrats who just, survived the trauma of Trump, understood that the allegations against Trump involved actions, that in their own way were more serious than things that Cuomo is accused of. But in particular, people remember the saga of Al Franken, the senator from Minnesota, who resigned after allegations which were, I think, pretty clearly in many cases, he had come from very politicized sources, that he resigned prior to an investigation. And one reason he resigned was because you had a number of fellow senators, including especially New York's Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who was really upfront saying Franken must resign. And I think in hindsight, given everything that had happened after and during that experience, the Democrats are very wary. I think one interesting aspect of this is that you have certain folks on social media actually kind of denying what they are in fact hearing from women, right? And it's very troubling to hear that kind of denialism going on. Speaking to JC's point, I think that what you ultimately have here is that the Democrats are really forced to live by the extremely high standards that they collectively, as a party, set after Harvey Weinstein and Me Too. And as I alluded to before, Cuomo was very much out in front, kind of embracing Me Too and a response to Me Too as his issue. So he required mandatory sexual harassment training for all workers in New York State, including himself. He really intensified the definition of sexual, well, I shouldn't say he intensified, he altered the definition of sexual harassment so that it is in fact easier to prove under the law in New York, which again may have made his actions in fact qualify as sexual harassment in our human rights code. And he generally just embraced Me Too as an issue politically. So I think that, if anything, is going to be what makes this process more difficult for himself than it might have been otherwise. And it's a true political conundrum.
Yeah. So Nayela, what cards does the governor have that will help him hold on?
I think one of the biggest cards that he holds is that politics is a long game and people have short memories. And while he's going through it this week and maybe going through it a couple more weeks, when it comes time for re-election, will it still be at the forefront of the New York electorate when it comes time to cast their ballots if he should choose to run again? I also think something else that he has in his favor is also, his ability to, he knows Albany, right? He knows how Albany works. And that's not to say that folks who are, in those Albany spaces do not. But if there's any one person in the state of New York who understands how to control what he can control in the political context in Albany, it is the governor. And to not just kind of make the assumption that because he's going through it with a negative press cycle this week or maybe next week, press cycles come and go, and just, he has proven time and again that he has this, this knack, this ability to really just kind of get over, previous challenges. And so I think that time will tell, how much damage this will have caused him when there's distance between, him asking for our support as the New York electorate, as opposed to what he's going through right now, which is a negative press cycle, which is part of the course, if you will. Yes.
So JC, the reason I asked you about the cards, one of the reasons is because this struck me yesterday from his press briefing. This is a quote from the governor. Okay, let's release all the allegations that JCOPE, and that's the Joint Committee in Public Ethics, has against Senate members and put them out there in the public arena, and then decide publicly if those senators should resign. Then he said, that's absurd. But I'm wondering, was that a thinly veiled threat, one of the cards he may be ready to play?
I think that's why us attorneys never allow our clients to go speak in front of the press without clearing things with us first. I think he's speaking out of emotion, he's speaking out of anger, he's speaking out of the fact that he says these are just allegations. Let the investigation happen. And he knows that there are many allegations in Albany that take place about absolutely everything. And he's defending himself. He's almost lashing out We saw that a lot coming out of Washington for the last 4 years. Again, we talk about what sits well with the voters, what sits well with New Yorkers. This doesn't sit well. To hear that kind of talk bothers us, and this doesn't bode well. So I would advise him to just stop talking about this. You've made your point. Let the investigation take its course, and you're going to have members that are going to ask for your resignation. You're a tough cookie. You yell at people. Assembly members have come out and said that you've yelled at them. Nobody likes to be yelled at. This is where they get their opportunity now to get even. And this is going to happen. And he has to just buckle down and hold on for the ride. This is going to get really bad this week. Let Tish James do her job.
How much of that is part of this, getting even with the governor whom they've hated? Let's face it, a lot of these guys have hated, and women have hated this guy for a while. How much is that of this?
Wait, Raphael, I'm not talking about them demanding resignation to get even. I'm saying that they're breaking out of the norm. Let's keep quiet when it's in our own party, as a reflection of the fact that, hey, you haven't been kind to me. Now, I don't have to be kind to you. The rules of the game of the before and yesteryear are no longer the rules. You may be in my party, but I'm coming after you. You see that with Senator Gustavo Rivera in the Bronx. I mean, you see that with Assemblyman Kim, people within your own party. Look, coming from the other side, I never see this. So this is a breath of fresh air to actually see people within your own family demand accountability. And they may see gloves off because of a history of being tough on them.
Alyssa, the sexual harassment charges have been somewhat overshadowing the nursing home scandal for the past week. But there have been stories breaking about the nursing home scandals that are quite powerful. For example, last week, we learned that the governor's top aides rewrote a report by the state's health department last June, omitting the numbers of death up to that time of people in nursing homes as a result of COVID. This is something we didn't know before. This is in June. How big is this story? I mean, it seems big.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it is in fact, I think Cuomo acting in typical Cuomo ways and not recognizing that the stakes of the moment with the bereaved families and with the intense scrutiny over COVID would mean that their actions would be appalling and really troubling. Because back in April, first, New York was one of the later states to release nursing home death numbers at all. My reporters I was working with were asking for them on a daily basis. When can we find out how many people have died in nursing homes? In mid-April, when the administration finally did begin to release deaths by nursing homes, reporters kept asking questions, and it became clear immediately. The administration admitted it, that they were not counting deaths that took place in hospitals of patients who have been discharged from nursing homes or who had been in nursing homes, gotten ill, and been transferred to hospitals. And we reported this at the time. And I think it was in part because so much was going on. This was really at the peak of the fatalities and the crisis, and was so much going on. The administration really did not get very much pushback on those numbers at the time, including from the leadership of the state legislature. You would have voices of, from the city council and so on, and elsewhere in the state raising questions, but that was about it. And so my sense is that really emboldened the Cuomo administration to continue this gaming of the numbers, as Cuomo went to work on a book celebrating his heroism in response to COVID. And now the sort of revisionist story from the administration became, well, once the Trump Justice Department started asking for numbers, well, we couldn't give them the numbers because they would have turned it into a political attack. But they had been covering up numbers since April openly and not facing any accountability.
But that's the point, and Ayala, I want to ask you this directly, which is, that's the main reason that they are giving now, why they didn't give these numbers, is what Alyssa just said, which because the Trump administration DOJ was going to use it as a witch hunt of the Cuomo administration. But the fact of the matter is that this report shows, what just came out, shows that they were hiding the numbers 2 months before the Cuomo administration began to looking for the numbers in August. How do they square that circle now?
I don't think that they can, right? In a way that is honest fully with New Yorkers. I think that, when Cuomo put out, the story was because he didn't want, the Trump administration to attack the numbers. I think that's something that, every elected official and, government as an institution owes to the public, which is the truth, the truth of how government is performing. And if it's not performing, the way that it should be, then let that be a space for accountability and hard lessons learned so that government can do better in the future, as opposed to playing with numbers to soften the blow for political reasons, is not effective governance, and it's certainly not governance that leads to trust by the electorate that elected the people to serve in government.
JC, the other big news that we learned last week relating to the nursing home scandal, well, that we learned that happened, was that the legislature, both houses of the legislature, passed the rescinding of the governor's emergency powers that he had, that was given to him last year when the pandemic began. What struck me, however, is that all the Republicans, if I'm right, both in the Senate and the Assembly, voted against that. Why?
Well, because it wasn't strong enough. They saw it as window dressing. Considering the realities of what we've heard from our guests today, it's just incredible to see that kind of light, kid gloves attempt to remove the power of the governor's emergency powers that he got last year. I think they viewed it as being too weak.
Yeah. Nayela, we're in the midst of a mayoral race. It's the most stealthy mayoral race that I've experienced in my time. What are the mayoral candidates saying about the sexual harassment scandals?
Well, some of them have called for, Governor Cuomo to resign. Other folks have not gone so far, but have really, encouraged again, the investigation. Let's wait to see what's happening. I do think something that has changed the dynamic of the mayoral race is the power of a potential, Cuomo endorsement, because a talking point in many of these mayoral conversations has been, will New York City finally get a mayor that can have an effective working relationship with the governor? And in light of, the past couple of weeks, the question is, will do New York's mayoral candidates want to seek, an endorsement from Governor Cuomo? And, is that really, a talking point that they want to lead with in terms of how effective their potential mayoral candidacy
I'm guessing
be?
not for the time being. I'm guessing not.
Yeah.
But Alyssa, with this sexual harassment headlines that are happening now and the fallout, New York State and New York City are supposed to be progressive state and a progressive city, among the most progressives in the country. We've never had a woman governor. We've never had a woman mayor. I wonder if the fallout of this, what's coming out of this, what JC was talking about earlier, if that's going to change the dynamic, if that's going to make it easier for a woman, perhaps one of the women candidates running for mayor now, to have a shot that perhaps not as much as they had before.
Well, I mean, in a very direct sense, right? Our Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul will become governor, at least temporarily, if Cuomo does resign, which he says he will not. But we have yet to hear anything. And I was very intrigued when Mayor de Blasio, in his briefing this morning to the press, said he believes that there's more information that's going to come out. I don't know what he's alluding to, but there may be more information coming out, right? So, and I think also with the mayoral race, we are seeing such a strong field of women running, and fortunately do not at this moment, although with one exception involving Andrew Yang, from a former employee at his test prep company, who had said that he had been never alleged sexual harassment, but alleged that he had been a very basically a sexist boss, was not accommodating of her when she became a mom. Other than that, we have not heard any kind of similar allegations involving the mayoral field, but I think it is really a moment to then reflect on women in power, and also to understand that women really do lead differently, and that the kind of entitlement that Andrew Cuomo had displayed in his not only in his third term, but according to Karen Hinton, and when he was HUD secretary, that he really did at minimum, according to his own admitted behavior, when he's saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I behave a certain way, I talk a certain way," that he felt so entitled to speak in this manner to women, to touch their backs, as we're hearing from multiple allegations, when he's taking photos with young women. All of that stuff, at minimum, you're seeing a kind of level of entitlement, and what Karen Hinton in an essay she wrote had called penis politics, that she said applied to many men in politics. I think people will be reflecting on that at the voting booth.
JC, we have about a couple minutes left, and I want to get into the COVID relief bill. It passed the Senate yesterday, I think, or late Saturday night, and it's now going back to the House, but it's expected to pass there too. How will this COVID relief bill affect New York City and the tri-state area?
Well, I think that initially it's going to be great news for those that are desperately needing the funds, especially state and local governments that desperately need money. This has been terrible for them. The question becomes, was it responsible? Or was it responsible to give this much money out to people who may not have needed relief? And that's the question that we're hearing from a lot of independents and centrists. Wouldn't it have been wiser, like so many centrists and independents were calling for there to be a more concentrated effort for those that really need this funding because of COVID? Why not, instead of diluting the amount of money that was available to give to more people, do we focus on those who really have suffered because of COVID and give them even more money? I think you would have seen Americans succeed more if that was the case. But unfortunately, this was something that many centrists and independents in the Senate couldn't understand, why we were throwing money at people who haven't really suffered because of COVID, instead of helping those who really needed the funds. I think that was a mistake in this bill, and I think many of us in the future are going to realize that it was in fact the wrong way to go about this funding.
But if any region is going to benefit, New York is going to benefit from this big bill.
There's no question that New York as a whole, because of the locality funding that's in this bill.
So you all agree on that. We have about 30 seconds left, and I need a yes or no answer on this. Will Governor Cuomo serve out his third term, his current term? JC?
I don't know.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Elizabeth?
Yes, unless we hear something else.
Okay. Naila?
Yes.
Okay. And you think he might even run again. I was surprised about that. Okay. I think that's where we're going to have to end it. Thank you all so much for joining us today. As always, it's been terrific.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
MetroFocus is made possible by Sue and Edgar Wackenheim III, Sylvia A. and Simon B. Poita Programming Endowment to Fight Anti-Semitism, the Peter G. Peterson and Joan Gans Cooney Fund, Bernard and Denise Schwartz, Barbara Hope Zuckerberg, the Ambrose Monell Foundation, and by Janet Prindle Seidler, Jody and John Arnhold, Cheryl and Philip Milstein family, Judy and Josh Weston, Dr. Robert C. and Tina Sohn Foundation.